The geography of a population. Demographic characteristic. Introduction. Demographic characteristics are the set of variables that make it possible to measure the population. Demography is the science that aims to study human population and their natural or migratory movement. It is essentially based on quantitative analysis, on the basis of which certain criteria are elaborated, the mastery of which is essential in geography. Example of criteria: birth rate, the mortality rate, the total fertility rate. Demographic dynamic, fertility, mortality, migration, geographical distribution, and by age and sex of population are at the head of the development process. The production, trade, and consumption of goods and services depend on the volume and structure of the population. We will see examples at different scales: global, regional, and national. The courses have four parts. Part 1, the movement of natural population growth. Part 2, the consequences of the aging of the population. Part 3, demographic structures. Part 4, population-related policy of African states. Part 1, the movement of natural population growth. The natural movement of population concerns the gradual change observed in a population as a result of the following demographic events: birth, marriage, divorce, death. In other words, natural movement is the result of birth rate and mortality. When the number of births is greater than the number of deaths, the natural movement is positive. When it is called natural increase. Conversely, when the number of deaths is greater than the number of dead, we speak of a natural deficit. Natural surplus equals births minus mortality. The birth rate expressed in per thousand is the number of live birds per thousand inhabitants per year. The rate depends on the proportion of women of childbearing age in the total population and their average fertility. Fertility can be expressed in two ways: the fertility rate, the average number of live births per thousand women of childbearing age, the total fertility rate, or sum or redux bird of total fertility rate. This index expresses the sum of fertility rates by age at a given date. The birth rate per thousand inhabitants in the world. In this map, we can see the birth rate per habitant in the world. The birth rate is a statistical data that gives the number of live birds per capita. It's an average population of the years. The birth rate is the higher in sub-Saharan Saharan Africa. Western European countries, the United States, and, for example, China, are lowest rate. Not the low rate of China. The Chinese situation is explained by the one-child policy in the country in order to limit the effect of a too rapid increase of the population. We are going to study here the Chinese case of the one-child policy. The one-child policy or family planning policy is the public birth control policy implemented by the People's Republics of China from 1979 to 2010. Intended to avoid the overpopulation of the country, it manifests itself essentially in the penalization of parents or more than one child, but also in the carrying out of abortion and sterilization by force. Wileks for peasant family in the 1980s. It's introduced in 2012, a new exception for couple where one of the member is himself an only child, then was replaced in 2010 by a policy setting the maximum number of children at 2 per family. In 2021, the relaxation is extended to 3 children per family. In this, we can see here the propaganda poster during the years 1980 showing the happiness to have only child in family. And this graphic is in French, but we can understand. The blue line here is the birth rate, and we can see that the birth rate is going down since 1980 to 2020. Fertility in the world. In this map, we can see the fertility in the world. The fertility rate indicates the average number of children per woman. As can be seen on this map, the African continent is the continent with the highest fertility rate on the planet. Women have an average more than 4 children. This rate explains the young of the African population. From the total fertility rate, 2.1 per woman, it is estimated that it will replace generations. In other words, for generational replacement to occur, a total fertility rate of 2.1 children per woman is required. The mortality rate is expressed in per thousand, which is the number of deaths per year per thousand inhabitants. A distinction is made between the neonatal mortality rate. It's mortality that occurs at the end of the month of birth. We have the infant mortality rate, which is the average number of children who die before the end of the years of birth per thousand births. And the child mortality rate concerns death under 5 years of age. Life expectancy. It expresses on a specific date the average number of years remaining to live for a generation of individuals. This indicator must be taken with precaution because its calculation is based on the conditions of the moment and does not allow perspective. We have here the mortality rate in the world. In demography, the mortality rate is the ratio between the annual number of deaths and the average total population over a period and in a given territory. This rate is used in demography with birth rate and fertility. It provides information on the general health condition of a country. It can be studied by age group with, for example, the infant mortality rate and the child mortality rate. We can see in this map that the highest mortality rate in the world are in sub-Saharan region and in East Europa and Russia too. A population is old when it contains more than 10% of population age more 65-year-olds. For example, in France, we have 12% of all population, 65% of adults, and 23% of young people. A population is said to be young when more than 25% to 40% of its population is under 25 years of age. For example, Ivory Coast. In Ivory Coast, we have 5% of all people, 45% of adults, and 50% of young. Inevitable aging. On a global scale, the aging of the population is inevitable. Currently, people over the age of 60 make up 20% of the world's population. This share is expected to increase in the coming years. Indeed, since 1989, the aging of the population concerns more and more states. The developed countries of North America, Europe, and Japan, but also Central Europe, Russia, Australia, and South America. Africa is the continent with the fewest people over the age of 60. The continent is young. Population under 510 years of age. The population under the age of 510 represents 25% of the world's population, a quarter of the world's population. As mentioned above, the population under 510 years of age is mainly present in the country of sub-Saharan Africa, south of Sahara. On this map, we have the number of inhabitants by country. We can see that Nigeria is the country where is the most populated in Africa with with 219 million of inhabitants. After we have Ethiopia and Egypt. The number of inhabitants by state in the world. Here we can see on this map the importance of China in world population and India in world population. Its importance date the antiquity. The two states usually been with high density in the world. And on this map, we can see that Nigeria is one of the country with most populated of the world. We can see here Nigeria, Egypt, and Ethiopia, and Egypt, the most populated country of Africa. We have too the region of Great Lake. Yes. Area disk on this map is the number of inhabitants by country. And we can see the importance of three countries in Africa in terms of population: Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Egypt. The population African continent is growing rapidly, estimated at 140 million at the beginning of the 20th century. It reached 1 billion inhabitants in 2010. It will be have 2 billion in 2050 and more than 4 billion at the beginning of the 22nd century, according to the average scenario of the United States. We can see the figure opposite. Means that 1 in 6 humans now lives in Africa. In 2050, it will be 1 in 4 humans lives in Africa, and more than 1 in 3 humans lived in Africa at the beginning of the 2022 century, according to this same projection. Reason for population growth. If Africa's population is growing, it is because of the excess of birth over death. Although mortality is the highest in the world, it has decreased as it has done before in other continents. Fertility has also declined, with women giving birth to an average of 4.5 children each in the 2070, compared to more than 6.5 40 years ago and 5.5 20 years ago. Africa is also experiencing an evolution that has already taken place in other continents, where it is more advanced. Only 2.1 children per woman in Asia in 2017, 2 in Latin America, 2.9 in North America, and 1.6 in Europe. With lower mortality than in the past and the still relatively high fertility explain why Africa's population is growing rapidly. Even if fertility continues to decline as assumed by the United Nations average scenario, this will not immediately result in a significant decrease in the rate of growth, let alone a half in growth due to the demographic inertia. Assuming that African fertility falls down to 1.6 children per woman as in Europe or China, a highly unlikely scenario, the population will continue to increase for a few more decades to reach nearly 1.6 billion in 2050. Africa's population includes many young adults and childbearing age. Even if everyone had few, it would result in a high number of births. The evolution of fertility, several recent surprises. Population projection published by the United Nations in 1981 predict about 10 billion human beings on the planet at the beginning of the 2022 century in their medium scenario. The latest projection published in June 2017 announced 11.2 or 0.7 more. The total is therefore a little higher, but the real change is in the distribution by continent. Asia, 5.9 billion inhabitants at the beginning of the 2022 century, according to the projection published in 1981, who has only 4.8 on the horizon in the one published in 2010. The revision is also downward for Latin America. 712 million at the beginning of the 2022 century instead of the revision is also downward for Latin America. 712 million in the beginning of the 2022 century instead of 1.1 billion. It is 40% less. Conversely, Africa with 2.2 billion inhabitants at the beginning of the 2022 century, according to the 1981 projection, has doubled that 2.4 billion in those publications in 2017. In intertropical Africa, where the decline in fertility well underway today is proceeding slowly. Hence, an increase in projection for Africa, which could therefore bring together more than 1 in 3 inhabitants of the planet at the beginning of the 2022 century. What's happening in intertropical Africa? Fertility is declining well in intertropical Africa, but in educated and urban areas more than in the countryside, where the majority of population still lives. Several factors could explain why the decline in fertility is recently slower than observed a few decades ago in Asia or Latin America. Africa is developed economically but slowly and has not yet reached the level of Asia or Latin American countries at the time when their fertility began to decline sharply. However, economic development and declining fertility often go hand in hand, with the latter often seen as a consequence of the former. Women's education is a key factor in this process. Those who have been to school give birth to fewer children than who have not. Asian and Latin American countries invest heavily in education for all a few decades ago. While education is progressing in intertropical Africa, especially among women, it still does not reach the level observed in Asia and Latin America when fertility declines in these continents. Another factor said to explain the smaller decline in fertility in Africa is the sharing of costs to raise children. In Africa, some of the children are raised by adults other than the parents, a grandparent, an uncle, an aunt, who bear the cost of feeding, dressing, and sending them to school. All over the world, humans are gradually making the choice to have few children, investing to each of them to ensure a long and quality life, which is not possible when there are many. But if having one more child does not entail increased expense because it will be taken care by it will be taken care of by other, the incentive to have few children remains less. The part two of its courses, the consequence of the aging or young of the population. Since Malthus, the debate on population has taken two main paths. The first way, those who think that a large population is a market, it's an economist vision. The second way, those who think that too many people trade food potential. What are the aging and young needs for the population? Demographic aging and the young of the population are accompanied by new needs. Governments must respond to people's needs in food, shelter, education, population aging, and managing conflict and resources, for example, oil and water. The challenge is to meet the need of population without compromising their environmental futures. It is important to find a balance between the three pillars of the sustainable development. The sustainable development appeared in the late 1980s in the Brundtland Report of the United Nations World Commission on the Environment, report used at the Earth Summit in 1982. And the main objective of the sustainable development, we have a lot of objectives, for example, reduction of poverty, good management for water and energy, economic growth, reduction of inequality. The need of a young population. Without being part of a debate between population representing a market and too much threatens food potential, it is clear that a large population with a high proportion of young pose many problems. Among others, we can mention the construction of training infrastructures, school, university, employment, health, housing problem. In a non-directly productive, human investment becomes more important than productive investments. The president of the African Development Bank in 2018 said that Africa must stop being a museum of poverty. Its people are determined to reverse this trend. The future of young Africa is not in Europe. Their destiny is not to perish in the Mediterranean Sea. The African Development Bank with the young. With 200 million people aged between 15 to 24, Africa is made up of the largest young population in the world. Current trends suggest that this number will double by 2045. The opportunity was too good. The African Development Bank is renewing its commitment to an inclusive economic transformation agenda focusing on the young of the continent. The thousands of desperate young Africans who wash up on the beaches of the North every year are sparking outrage around the world. Equally deplored is the silent exodus of the continent's young elite to the West in search of a better life. Both categories of immigrants are fleeing poverty. Invariably, African export is featured en masse. The African Development Bank is working in particular to reverse this trend. The futures of Africa's agriculture and industrial economy and the continent place in the still nascent young industrial revolution are at stake. Migration and poor economic choice, in addition to a combination of other factors, have certainly hampered African effort to industrialize over the past decade. The Bank of Development have conscious of its situation. To attract more young Africans to agriculture, the bank has invested more than $800 million since 1960, particularly through action to support young farmers in more than 510 countries. It will also mobilize more than $1.5 billion per year over the next 10 years to help these young agricultural entrepreneur or agripreneur, in addition to accelerate Africa's industrialization. The bank is promoting special economic zones across the continent to attract investors in its industrial sector in a special area dedicated to the industry and service, and this special area are very attractive for young workers. In February 2018, the bank embarked on an initiative to increase 130 centers of excellence across Africa as part of its Coding for Employment program. This center will work to reduce the imbalance between the training of young Africans and the hiring needs of employers. The need of the aging population. Conversely, when the population is old, there is a problem of different nature, especially in rich countries. The old age, the population consume a lot of medicine, consume of asylum house, difficulty of contribution to feed to the social security fund because of less and less contributor, the lack of labor which become more expensive, the authority call on foreign workers to continue to maintain its leading position in industrial and agricultural production sector. In Africa, although the population is very young, the aging of the population will occur and it will naturally be faster than in other parts of the world. Needs are to be met such as social protection, pension, adapted health and care policies. Estimates of Africans' aging population. Demographic aging is thus expected to occur in ways that are very different from what has been observed in the Western world. Regional variations are also to be considered. In 2050, the share of population age more 60 have its distribution. Almost 17% in Northern Africa, almost 5–10% in Southern Africa, almost 9% in East Africa, and almost 7% in West and Central Africa. Depending on national context, the number of population age 16 and over is expected to quadruple in 35 years, and the number of people age 80 and over is also expected to increase sharply. Prospective studies on population aging are taking place or are ongoing. The first studies date back to more than 30 years ago. They stress the importance of the term in the field of public health. This work has highlighted intergenerational solidarity in Africa, but also on the link between demography and social policies. They show that family support systems are built around descent and other relative while encountering limits that the state struggles to compensate for, as existing social protection system and the provision of care only very partially meets the needs of the elderly. These studies focus on the various ways of aging in the different states, but also between the urban and rural worlds, on the social utility and the elder per se. For example, by the Fulani of fellow as vector of the dissemination of knowledge, on their role as provider, as assistant within family in a context of difficulties in professional integration. Example of Senegal. Part 3. Demographic structures. We can study the population according to the structure by sex, age, residence, nationality, socio-professional category. By gender, the study of the population by sex is of paramount importance because the number of women makes it possible, for example, to predict the evolution of a population. We just calculate the sex ratio, male, female, or female, men, or index of masculinity or femininity, which express the ratio between the number of men and women at birth or at a given age. It is the difference from the rate of masculinity and the rate of femininity. Age structures. It is possible to analyze the young or the aging trend of the population. A distinction is made between the young population aged to 0 to 15, the adult population aged to 15 to 60 or 65, and the elder over 60 or 65. In some books, the classification of young goes up to 19 years, adult age 19 to 60, 65, and 65 more 65, the elderly. We can understand the structure of the population on an age pyramid. It is in the form of histogram, which the number and age group on the abscissa in ordinate. It is divided into two parts, men on the left and women on the right. In general, the age pyramid traces the history of the population. The image top shows a long life expectancy, while the tapered top is synonymous with a short life expectancy. Moreover, the screening based of developed country is the expression of a non-renewal of generation, also called baby crash, as opposed to the expanded base baby boom. As I have said, the pyramid age is an histogram with the number and age group. We can see the number and age group here, and the number of population expressed in percentage, in percent. And on the right, we have the part of the woman on the right and the part of the man on the left in blue color. The pyramid age, the age pyramid, traces the history of a population. The image top shows a long life expectancy, while the tapered top is synonymous with a short life expectancies, as we can see there. Here in Africa we have a short life expectancies, and the life expectancies is under the average of Africa in South Africa. And the base of the pyramid is very large in Africa, showing the young structure of the population. And in South Africa, we can see that the base is smaller and is equal that the group age of adult. the reduction of the base of the pyramid age means that a woman doing less and less children, the fertility rate start to reduce, the birth ratio is starting to reduce too, and we can see there we are enter in a transition, demographic transition. Here we have the example of the use of the age pyramid to show the impact of AIDS on age structures of the population, and here the population of Botswana. The effect of AIDS on the size and structure of population are highlighted. The case of Botswana illustrates the impact of the disease on the age structure and the long-term demographic consequence that with structural portents adults are the main victims. As we can see here, we can do the comparison between women on the right and men on the left. We can do the comparison. We can understand that men are more touched by AIDS in comparison of the woman. And we can see that the AIDS have a great impact on the population structure of Botswana. We can see that a lot of adults and young are touched by AIDS, and there are children who birth with the virus. Structure by socio-professional category. The structure of a population by socio-professional category is also analyzed. First, the share of the population that occupies or is looking for a job is assessed. There are people whose age vary between 15 and 64 years. Any person who receives remuneration as a result of the exercise of an activity is active. The housewife is not classified as an active person, but this tends to change since some work. We can note that by convention, military contingent belongs to the active population. The activity rate of the population is the proportion of the active population in relation to the working age population. The dependency ratio or dependency ratio is the ratio between the number of population in inactivity age group and the number of population of working age. A concept very important to understand we study as population. The structure of a population is the demographic transition. I'm going to take time to explain the demographic transition. Across the world, growth rates are varied. The disparity is explained by a growth differential over the last 3 centuries. This disparity in the pace of growth is linked to cultural, economic, and urbanization. As a result, the rate of population aging varies from one continent to another. This pace is appreciated for the demographic transition. This transition is divided into 3 stages according to the model below. Here in the model it is French, but we can understand. Here we have phase 1, the step 1, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and stage 4. In the text we talk about phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4. During the phase 1, what happened? During the in the graphic, in the model, in brown we have the bird ratio here in brown, and in pink we have the dead ratio. On the graphic we have the ratio here and the time, periodic time here. And here the periodic time is from 1850 to 20. During the phase 1, the stage 1 here correspond to the pre-transitional phase, during which mortality and birth rates remaining very high, and this induce a slow growth of a population. It's normally because the difference between birds and dead is very, very small. The demographic transition itself is during the phase 2, the second stage. Mortality is decreasing rapidly as a result of advances in medicine, control of food production, and acceptable lifestyle. Mainly the birth rate remains high. This leads to strong population growth. Change in the sexual behavior are not as immediate. During the phase 3, here, phase 3, stage 3, mortality and birth rates continue to decline, and we can see here that it's the birth ratio who decline fastly during this stage, during this phase, and people continue to increase. There's a natural increase of the population, and the people problem starts. I would like to say that during this phase, with natural increase of population, there are new needs to satisfy in the population. At the end of its stage, the volume of population is declined rapidly and is stabilizing at a constant level. And we are there in the phase 4, the stage 4. During this stage, the birth ratio is very, very low, and the dead ratio is low too, and the difference in birth and mortality is very, very small. and we talk about all this transition. All this transition is the demographic transition. During the demographic transition, we have the increase of the population, means that birds are very, very high guess than the mortality rate. The part 4 of this course is population-related policy of African states. Population policy does not refer to measures to reduce the rate of population growth. Authors such as Mayon Stico emphasize the goal of changing demographic behavior in developing nations. For the problem of population, it's first necessary to study the spatial distribution of the population. So having a good understanding of dynamic and distribution and their relationship with the economy, society, cultural history, political context is necessary. This sometimes leads to measures in non-demographic areas which can take the form of radical change in the economy, including in terms of its organization and technical choice. Such measures may constitute an implicit population policy. A population policy is linked to a development policy. The many crises and instabilities show the importance of building stable population institutions. We are going to start with a historical perspective. The description of Arab geographer and traveler between the 10th and 15th century attests to brilliant and well-organized civilization, but without objective numerical indication. It was not until the middle of the millennium and the beginning of the European conquest to have more precise idea about the population of Africa. This would have increased from 16 million at the beginning of the 16th century to 90 million at the beginning of the 19th century and 130 million at the beginning of the 20th century. A doubling of inhabitants of Africa in 4th century, while Europe quadrupled its population at the same time. Its relative importance in the world fell from 13% at the beginning of the 16th century to 9% at the beginning of the 20th century. Only now we return to its level of 5 centuries ago. Its remarkable demographic boom, with a six-fold increase in its population since the beginning of the 20th century, has given Africa a momentum little known elsewhere, and as a result, a long prospect of its continued growth. The slave trade was the main obstacle to African demographic expansion, since it lost millions of population of working age forced to go and build the prosperity of the new world, of which Africa was the second source of settlement after Europe. It is common to wonder whether the contemporary demographic expansion of sub-Saharan Africa does not owe, in part, its reason to be enormous loss incurred at the time. Colonization took over forced labor forced labor has not resulted in net population loss, but above all in population displacement. New diseases have weighed on people dynamic. They took over from the famine and economic fought back the colonial system in a spirit of economic profitability. For the first time in 1964, the member states of the United Nations meeting in Bucharest to discuss population problem at the ministerial level adopt a global plan of action. It is the result of a laborious negotiation between supporters of different positions. African countries have been criticized for remaining silent or timid in Bucharest and for not taking up the cause of family planning. In the context of the time, it seemed difficult for them to endorse such an option because emergencies were elsewhere, the construction of state and institutions was underway. How could family planning help them resolve their current concerns? In many cases, a social problem, let alone population issues, have become the second most important issues. Only 7 countries at the time had an explicit population policy: Botswana, Egypt, Ghana, Kenya, Mauritius, Morocco, and Tunisia. After 1974, population issues received more attention from government. Most countries considered themselves to be subpopulated and wanted to increase their population. Among the reasons given, find the idea that there was a need for more manpower to explore potential resources and that the internal market should be enlarged. In addition, low population density were considered insufficient to justify the construction to heavy infrastructure. To this should be added act that of prestige attached to a large population and need to be respected by neighbors when their population was large. Several development plans at the time found the rapid population growth rate. In the countries of Central Africa, which were under fertility, the pro-natalist attitude was in order. Thus, Cameroon, for example, does not want to take no measurement of birth spacing before seeing its population reach 10 million inhabitants. In Gabon, according to the law in 1920, owing contraceptive was punishable. This law is moreover which remained in force in most of the former French colonies long after the France has abandoned it herself. In addition to the 7 countries which had already adopted a policy of reducing the fertility, others began to worry through their plans national rapid population growth and its implication on education, health, and employment sector. Only Egypt, with about 3,000 centers in clinic and hospital, had a sufficient number of delivery service. Tunisia and Kenya was filling the infrastructure gap with mobile teams. What is the Kilimanjaro Program of Action? 1984. The first African Population Conference in Accra, 1971, had gone almost unnoticed. The year 1984 was a millennium in the history of population policy in Africa, with the holding in Arusha of the Second African Population Conference. 76 out of 50 countries were present, better informed and better documented. The Kilimanjaro Program of Population Health Self-Centered Development, which consensus because each country found, according to its own situation, its vision of the problems. 83 recommendations were adopted for the program, for the Kilimanjaro program of population. Population, for example, the recommendation concern population and development strategy and policy, fertility and planning program, morbidity and mortality, urbanization and migration, changing role of women in development, children and young, data collection and analysis, training and research, population information, community participation, and the world of non-governmental organizations. Important topics such as aging and the environment were not addressed. The Dakar and Go Declaration on Population, Family and Sustainable Development in 1982. In 1982, the Third African Population Conference concluded with another consensus formulated in the Dakar and Gno Declaration on Population, Family and Sustainable Development. The Dakar Conference attracted as such, if not more, interest than the Arusha Conference, taking into account the record attendance of African countries and that of observed from African non-governmental organizations who participate for the first time. The conference reiterated the validity of the proclamation of Kilimanjaro action and recommend its implementation. It was also in view of the certain progress made by an African country in their knowledge of their problem, over problems such as family, the environment, the AIDS, refugees, and displaced persons. With some conference also instead on the establishment of the follow-up mechanism to encourage the implementation of recommendation. This is how the problem of young and women I highlight, in particular adolescent fertility. Environmental problem also feature prominently. Case study of Kenya. Kenya, African country that is a pioneer in terms of population policy, is however the opposite of Mauritian case, which is often taken as references model on the continent. Official launch of family planning activity start is 1966. The main objective is to reduce fertility. To this end, family planning information, education and survey should be provided on request and free of charge in all hospitals and other government health centers. Special emphasis was also placed on maternal and child health and assistance and on assistance to suffering couples. The Marriage Act of the years 1876 raised the minimum age for the marriage to 18 for women and 20 for men. Abortion was allowed to preserve maternal health. In the early 80s, Kenya was also the country in sub-Saharan Africa where contraceptive methods were less ignored by women. But paradoxically, there was also one of the lowest contraceptive prevalence associated with the highest fertility on the continent, with just 8 children per woman. Kenya population growth remains among the highest in the world, with an average of 3.58% in 1985 to 1990. It decreased slightly where thereafter. Contraception, almost one-third of married women use a birth control method, compared with 14% in 1984 and 6% in 1977 or 78. The average ideal family size was 1.4 children in 1989 compared to 5.8 children in 1984. Married women need family planning either to space birth or to limit them. Kenya would even have become the first African country, following by Tunisia and Botswana, where the design to stop is more widespread than that of spacing. Everywhere elsewhere, it is opposite what we observe. Like Mauritius, Kenya has considered since 1889 that the level of immigration should be reduced. The challenge of the 2018 census, the information generated by population of housing censuses, number of inhabitants, distribution, living conditions, and other data is essential for formulation of development policy. In the absence of accurate data, policymakers are unable to determine the infrastructure that requires investment. School, hospital, road, and the poorest population are not identified. Yet the demographics of many countries are now outdated or inaccurate. The population and housing census is one of the largest and most complex operations implemented in state in peacetime. Its exercise is not limited to counting the number of inhabitants. It also makes it possible to measure fertility, mortality, and displacement, and to identify demographic trends. Finally, a census can also help detect inequality in employment, education, and wealth. The role of the Fund of United States for Population, the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA. The organization was founded in 1969, the years in which the United Nations General Assembly declared that parents have the exclusive right to determine freely and responsibly the number and timing of births. The Fund of United States for Population aims to ensure that no country is forced to give up conducting a population census for technical or financial reasons. The organization provides technical support to each phase of a national census and helps to ensure that the data are readily disseminated and used for development purposes. Based in Dakar, Senegal, the UNFPA's regional office for West and Central Africa covered 23 countries: Congo, Brazzaville, Cameroon, Central Africa, Burkina Faso, Benin, Ivory Coast, Gabon, Guinea, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Senegal, Chad, and Togo. There are two there are two English spoken country, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Ghana, Gambia. Free Portuguese speaker, Cabo Verde, Guinea-Bissau, Sao Tome, Principe, and a Spanish speaker, Equatorial Guinea. Established in January 2050, the regional office provides a link between UNFPA headquarters in New York and the office of the 23 countries in West and Central Africa it covers. Counting the living population in a territory on a given date, population size, population characteristic, housing condition, training for infrastructure development operations, school, high school, university, hospital, roads, landfill, new neighborhoods, and housing. In conclusion, demographic characteristics are the set of variables that make it possible to measure the population. The study of human population and their natural or migratory movement is essentially based on quantitative analysis, and the basis of which certain criteria are elaborated, the mastery of which is essential in the geography of the population. Example of criteria: birth rate, the mortality rate, the total fertility rate, demographic transition not to be understood. For the segment, see the population censuses of your country, the evolution of demographic criteria, and population policy improvement. Here we have a biography about this topic. I let you to read it, and I said you thank you very much to listen these courses. Thank you to be indulgent with my French accent. Thank you very much. See you soon.